More than a century ago, in Germany at the start of the 20th century, the heir to an industrial empire looked at the factories that would one day be his and did what no one expected. He turned it all down. His name was Max Horkheimer, and he would dedicate his entire life to deciphering an invisible disease that was beginning to take over the modern world. The same disease that today lives inside you. But why would a millionaire heir walk away from his own fortune to study philosophy? How did human reason, which promised to set us free, end up reduced to a profit calculator? Why is it that the desires you call your own may never have been chosen by you? And what is left of a man when money becomes the measure of all things? From forced exile under an authoritarian regime to a prophecy that described your daily routine decades before you were born. This is the story of the thinker who saw, before anyone else, the world you wake up to every morning. It's 11 at night. The house is dark, and the only light on is the glow of your phone screen, bluish, hitting your tired face. You should be asleep. But there you are, lying down, answering one last work message with your thumb, while your credit card bill sits open in another tab. Tomorrow, the alarm goes off at 6. And in the middle of that silence, a question rises from deep in your chest without asking permission. What am I doing all this for? You push it back down. You always push it down. Horkheimer predicted that scene, that bedroom, and that question. And he discovered something disturbing. Money didn't just buy your things. It bought the way you think. Now watch that same calculation at work in broad daylight. Someone invites you out, and before you answer, a silent tally happens. Is it worth it? What do I get out of it? An old friend sends you a message, and the first thing that crosses your mind is how much time it's going to cost you. You meet someone new at a party, and without realizing it, you size up their clothes, their job title, the phone they're carrying, like someone reading a price tag. Nobody taught you this in a classroom. Nobody sat you down and said, from now on, treat people like investments. And yet you do it. We all do. Time became currency. A Sunday afternoon with no plans breeds guilt, as if resting was stealing from yourself. Reading a book that doesn't serve your career feels like a luxury. Sitting in silence feels like waste. Even rest has to pay off. The trip has to become a photo. The outing has to become a story. The hobby has to become a side hustle. And that 11 o'clock question is still there, pushed down, waiting. This is not a flaw in you. It's not weakness of character or a lack of spirituality or the consequence of you being too rational. This is the end result of a historical process that took centuries to complete and that Horkheimer dissected with a precision that is frightening even today. He saw this machinery forming when it was still young. He warned us. Almost no one listened. And now we live precisely inside the world he described, without even knowing the name of the prison we inhabit. But before you get to know the ideas, you need to know the man, because his biography explains why he could see what no one else could. Horkheimer was born in 1895, near Stuttgart, Germany, the son of a wealthy industrialist of Jewish descent who owned textile factories. His fate was mapped out from the cradle. Inherit the business, multiply the family wealth, take his father's place. Still a teenager, he was put to work in the family factory, and it was there, on the factory floor, that something broke inside him. Young Max saw up close what money did to people on both sides of the counter. The workers reduced to parts of the machine, and the bosses reduced to calculating machines. He knew the world of profit from the inside. He wasn't a theorist talking about something he'd never seen. He was an heir who looked at his inheritance and asked, "Is this all there is?" He abandoned the ready-made path. He studied philosophy, psychology, economics. In 1930, he became director of the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, the birthplace of what the world would come to know as the Frankfurt School, a group of thinkers determined to understand why humanity, with all its science and all its progress, kept producing misery and suffering on an industrial scale. Then came 1933. An authoritarian regime seized power in Germany, and Horkheimer, persecuted for his heritage and his ideas, had to flee. The institute was shut down, the books confiscated. He crossed the ocean and settled in the United States, first in New York, then in California. And here lies one of the most revealing ironies in the history of thought. He fled the explicit oppression of Europe and found, in prosperous, free America, a quieter form of domination. No one pounded on his door in the middle of the night. No one censored his books. But he looked around at the glowing billboards, at the radios playing the same songs, at the people rushing between work and the stores, and realized that another kind of domination existed there. A domination that didn't need soldiers because it lived inside people's heads. A prison where the inmates defended the bars. It was by observing that world, our world in embryonic form, that he wrote his most devastating work. And the heart of that work is a distinction that is simple to understand and impossible to forget once you do. In 1947, Horkheimer published a book called Eclipse of Reason. The central argument is this: there are two ways of using reason, and modern civilization killed one of them. The first he called objective reason. It's the reason that asks about ends. What is living for? What is a good life? What is just? What deserves to be done? For millennia, from Plato to the great religious and philosophical systems, humanity believed those questions had answers that could be sought rationally. Reason existed to discover what was true and what was good, and life was supposed to be organized around those discoveries. The second he called subjective reason, or instrumental reason. It's the reason that only asks about means. It doesn't debate whether a goal is worthy. It merely calculates the most efficient path to reach it, whatever it may be. It's the reason of the spreadsheet, the procedure, the optimization. It works equally well for building a hospital or for tearing down an ancient forest, because the question, should this be done, simply isn't part of its vocabulary. The difference becomes crystal clear in an example anyone can recognize. Faced with a job offer, objective reason asks, is this work dignified? Does it contribute something? Would I become a better person doing this every day? Instrumental reason asks only, how much does it pay? Notice that the second question isn't wrong. It's necessary. Bills exist, payments come due, the fridge needs to be full. The problem Horkheimer identified isn't the existence of calculation. The problem is what happened when calculation was left standing alone. Because that is exactly what happened. Throughout modernity, objective reason was discredited, ridiculed, pushed out of serious conversation. And what remained was an entire world governed by a reason that knows how to do everything except answer why anything is worth doing at all. Horkheimer chose the word eclipse carefully. An eclipse doesn't destroy the sun, it only covers it. Objective reason was never refuted by any argument. It was silenced by a process. Modern science, with all its power, declared that true knowledge exists only about measurable facts. What can be weighed, measured, counted, and tested is real. Everything else, the good, the just, the meaning of life, was demoted to the category of personal opinion, taste, preference, something you argue about over drinks, never in the laboratory or the boardroom. Think about what that means in practice. If someone claims in a conversation that a certain investment yields 12% a year, everyone treats the claim seriously, asks for the source, checks the numbers. But if someone claims that a life devoted solely to accumulating is a wasted life, the reaction is a condescending smile. Well, that's your point of view. The first statement belongs to the world of adults. The second was exiled to the territory of opinions, where nothing has to be taken seriously. An entire civilization learned to discuss prices with rigor and values with disdain. Horkheimer devoted entire chapters of Eclipse of Reason to showing how this demolition was carried out by the very philosophical currents that dominated the modern world. Positivism decreed that only the natural sciences produce legitimate knowledge, and that any discussion of values is meaningless noise, residue from superstitious ages. American pragmatism, which he came to know up close in exile, finished the job by another route. An idea is true to the extent that it works, that it produces useful results. Notice the poison hidden in that seemingly innocent formula. If truth is what works, then truth became the servant of utility, and the question, is this true, was replaced, without so much as a farewell ceremony, by the question, does this pay? Thought, Horkheimer wrote, was demoted to an instrument among instruments, evaluated the way you evaluate a hammer or a piece of software, by performance. A philosophy that doesn't increase the efficiency of anything came to be treated like a broken appliance. And don't think this stayed in the books. This demolition seeped into your own education. The school you attended taught you to solve equations and memorize procedures, and how many hours did it devote to the question of what a just life is? The university has largely turned into a professional training center, where knowledge is worth the salary it unlocks. Parents who tell their poetry-loving kid that there's no money in that aren't being cruel. They're just repeating, in household language, the verdict an entire civilization has pronounced. Each generation receives the Eclipse ready-made and hands it down, a little darker, to the next. The result is a paradox you feel in your bones every day, even without a name for it. We have never been so competent and never been so lost. We know how to edit genes, land probes on comets, put the world's knowledge in a device that fits in your pocket. And at the same time, when a man wakes up at 3 a.m. with the question, "What am I doing all this for?" the most powerful civilization in history has nothing to offer him. No answer. Just a painkiller, a new show to binge, and the recommendation to go back to sleep because there's a meeting tomorrow. A civilization that is technically brilliant and existentially mute. It's a harsh phrase, but it describes with precision the world you wake up to every morning. And this is where Horkheimer's analysis takes the step that makes it definitive. Because a question hangs in the air. If reason can no longer say what is good, what is worthy, what deserves our lives, then who decides? Some criterion has to organize human choices. Some value has to occupy the empty throne, and one candidate took the post without facing any resistance. Money. Not because of the malice of bankers, not because of a conspiracy of the powerful. Through pure logic, money is the only value that instrumental reason can process because it speaks its language, numbers. It is measurable down to the last cent. It is comparable. Anything can be placed next to anything else and beaten or defeated by its price. It is universal. It crosses any border and any culture without losing a scent of validity. In a world where only what can be measured is taken seriously, money became the only measure left standing. It didn't win a debate about values. It won because the debate was cancelled. And then something sinister happens to everything that can't be converted into a price. Loyalty that generates no advantage, contemplation that produces nothing, honor that costs opportunities, caring for an elderly father, which consumes years. These things aren't attacked head-on. Nobody gives speeches against loyalty. They suffer a worse fate. They start to seem irrational. A waste of time, the naivety of someone who never figured out how the game works. When a value doesn't fit in the ledger doesn't declare itself limited. It declares the value non-existent. You've felt this before. That subtle embarrassment when admitting you turned down a promotion to have more time with your family, and the person across from you looked at you like they were looking at a math error. That need to justify a sabbatical, a philosophy course, an idle afternoon, always translating it into the language of the market. It'll be great for my networking. It'll boost my productivity. Notice the humiliation hidden in there. Even to defend what has no price, you have to pretend it does. Getting out of this trap starts with one simple step. Understanding philosophy is interesting. Practicing philosophy can change your life. Start with the link I left in the first pinned comment. Now, a question needs to be asked, because it changes everything that comes next. How did we get here? This world of total calculation didn't fall from the sky. It was built, and it was built with the best intentions in human history. This is the most disturbing part of Horkheimer's investigation, and it's what explains why escaping is so hard. During his years in California, Horkheimer wrote, together with his friend and intellectual partner, Theodor Adorno, a book that became one of the most influential texts of the 20th century, Dialectic of Enlightenment, published in 1947. The two started from a burning question. Why was humanity, instead of entering a truly human state, sinking into a new kind of barbarism? Their answer is dizzying. The Enlightenment, The great movement that promised to liberate man through knowledge carried within itself the seed of the new prison. The promise was beautiful. In place of fear, science. In place of superstition, understanding. In place of masters, free men guided by their own reason. And part of that came true. The old myths fell. The magical explanations of the world were dismantled one by one. Man learned to dominate nature as no previous generation had ever dreamed. But the instrument of that victory was precisely instrumental reason, the reason that treats everything as an object to be known, controlled, and used. And here is the tragic turn Horkheimer and Adorno saw. A reason trained to dominate doesn't know how to stop. After turning forests into lumber, rivers into energy, and ore into machines, it turned toward the last available territory, man himself. The same techniques of measurement and control that tamed nature were applied to the worker in the factory, the consumer in the store, the voter in the campaign, the child in the school. The master of nature discovered too late that he, too, is nature. The spear he pointed at the world came full circle. And the greatest irony, the reason that destroyed the old myths manufactured a new myth, more resilient than all the previous ones because it presents itself as science. The myth of efficiency, the myth of infinite growth, the unquestionable belief that more production, more speed, and more accumulation are goods in themselves, needing no justification for what they serve. Nobody prays to this God, but everybody obeys. Questioning growth today sounds as absurd as questioning Zeus sounded in ancient Greece. To show that this tragedy didn't begin yesterday, Horkheimer and Adorno went back to the origin of Western culture and reread an episode you probably know, Ulysses and the Sirens, from Homer's Odyssey. They saw in it, millennia before the factories, an early portrait of modern man. Remember the scene. The sirens sing a song so beautiful that no man can resist. Whoever hears it throws himself into the sea and never returns. Ulysses wants to hear the song without losing himself. His solution is pure instrumental reason. He plugs the rowers' ears with wax so they can work without hearing anything, and orders them to tie him to the mast so he can listen without being able to surrender. It works. The ship passes. And look at what's left. The workers, deaf to beauty, just rowing, and the boss, who hears the beauty but is tied down, unable to live it, turning the most intense experience in the world into something contemplated from a distance, under control, without consequence. The rowers with plugged ears are the modern worker, numbed, hitting targets without hearing his own life pass by. And Ulysses tied to the mast is today's successful man, who can pay for beauty, for art, for experience, but always scheduled, always safe, always without the risk of it truly transforming him. An entire civilization learned to pass through life like that ship, hearing the song from a distance, tied to the mast of productivity, proud of never having jumped. Look at your own routine, and you'll see this dialectic at work. The washing machine promised free time. The time it freed up was immediately filled with more work. Email promised speed. Today, you answer work messages on the couch, on holidays, in bed. The cell phone promised connection. It installed the office inside your pocket and the storefront inside your downtime. Every technology delivered exactly what it promised, and in the very same motion, tightened the screw. There are economists who calculate that we work more effective hours than medieval peasants did, surrounded by devices that conquered scarcity. Progress didn't lie. It just charged a price nobody read in the contract. You might be thinking, fine, work got captured, but at least my free time is mine. My evenings, my movies, my music, my leisure. That's where I rest from the system. Hold that thought for a moment, because it was precisely at this point that Horkheimer and Adorno made the book's most uncomfortable discovery. And it has everything to do with what you did last night before falling asleep. They coined a concept that became famous: the culture industry. The choice of words is already a punch to the gut. Before them, people spoke of mass culture, as if popular entertainment sprang spontaneously from the people. The two rejected the term. What existed, they said, was an industry, in the most literal sense. Films produced on an assembly line, songs made to order, radio programs, glossy magazines, everything rolling off the conveyor belt with the same logic as a soap factory. Standardization disguised as variety. They observed the Hollywood studios and American radio stations of the 40s and noticed that the films looked different on the surface, but all obeyed the same formula. That from the first minute you could predict the ending, and that the hit songs were so alike that one could be swapped for another without anyone noticing. But the decisive part isn't the aesthetic critique. It's the function. What is this standardized fun for? Their answer: entertainment exists to prolong work. The factory worker and the office employee come home too exhausted for any experience that demands effort, and the culture industry offers exactly the food for that exhaustion. Entertainment that asks nothing, challenges nothing, transforms nothing. It merely restores the worker, like machine maintenance, so that tomorrow he can produce again. To be entertained, they wrote, means to be in agreement. It means not thinking, forgetting suffering, even where it is shown. The escape from daily life that the movies promise is an escape that returns the fugitive, right on time, to the factory gates on Monday morning. And there was more. While it entertains, the culture industry teaches. Every film, every ad, every magazine shows what a successful life looks like, which car communicates victory, which body deserves love, which house proves you've made it. Entertainment became civilization's catalogue of desires. People leave the movie theater not only rested for work, but convinced they need to work even harder to buy the life they just watched. Now, do the exercise of updating that analysis, written when television was still in its infancy. Horkheimer and Adorno knew cinema and radio. We have streaming that rolls one episode into the next without you having to lift a finger. We have the infinite feed, an invention mathematically engineered to never end. We have algorithms that study every second of your attention, every pause of your thumb over the screen, and use that data to predict, with laboratory precision, which image will keep you there for another 30 seconds. What the two philosophers described as a tendency became architecture. The culture industry of the last century had to guess what held the public's attention. Today's measures it in real time. If they called the cinema of the 40s an industry, we would lack the vocabulary to describe a platform that knows your desires better than your own mother does. And that brings us to a question that may be the most intimate and most uncomfortable one in this entire video. If your desires are studied, measured, and fed by a precision machine, how much of them is still yours? For Horkheimer and Adorno, the culture industry doesn't satisfy needs that already existed. It manufactures them. And it manufactures them with such efficiency that the final product, the desire, arrives in the individual's consciousness wearing the label authentic. Modern man is absolutely certain that he dreams his own dreams. He wants the car from that brand, the watch of that model, the trip to that photogenic destination, the look of success recognizable from a distance. And if you ask him why he wants it, he'll say he always has, that it's in his nature, that it's healthy ambition. He doesn't remember receiving these desires, just as no one remembers learning their native language. It happened too early. It was too constant. Thousands of images a day since childhood, all pointing in the same direction. So ask the honest question, the one almost no one has the courage to ask in front of the mirror. How much of what you call my dreams was actually chosen by you? Mentally lay out your list of goals. The house of a certain standard, the job title with a certain name, the body of a certain shape, the lifestyle that produces a certain kind of photo. Now try to remember the moment you chose each item, not the moment you started chasing it, but the moment you decided, among real alternatives, that it was worth your life. In most cases, that moment doesn't exist. The desire was already there when you arrived. You didn't choose it. You inherited it from a system that profits from it. And there is something deeply sad about a man who sacrifices decades chasing a trophy that someone else designed for him. This explains, by the way, the mystery of the empty achievement. which you may have already lived through. You reach the goal, the car arrives, the promotion comes through, and the promised happiness lasts a week. Then the hunger returns, pointing to the next item in the catalogue. It's not ingratitude on your part. It's that satisfaction was never the system's goal. A satisfied desire is a customer standing still. The machine needs the hunger to be permanent, and that's why it designs desires that work like the horizon. They recede at the same speed you advance. Now watch what this machinery did to the center of adult life. Work. Because that's where Horkheimer's diagnosis becomes almost unbearable in its precision. In Eclipse of Reason, he describes a cycle that defines modern existence. Work, which could be an expression of what is human in man, his creativity, his mark on the world, was reduced to pure means. You work to survive and to consume. You consume to endure the work and show off its fruits. And you endure the work to keep consuming. The circle closes without the question ever appearing at any point in it. What for? Horkheimer uses a spine-chilling expression to describe the result. Self-preservation without a self. Modern man devotes total energy to preserving himself, to staying in the race, to not falling behind. But if you ask what exactly he is preserving, what self justifies so much sacrifice, you find a void. He clings tooth and nail to a life he has no time to live. He furiously protects a self he never had time to build. Pay attention to how this cycle disguises itself as virtue. Contemporary culture celebrates exhaustion like a medal. I have zero free time stopped being a complaint and became a status symbol, a polite way of saying, I'm in demand, I'm important, I'm expensive. The executive who sleeps 5 hours flaunts the deprivation like a trophy. The busy quietly look down on the idle. Horkheimer would identify in this the complete triumph of instrumental reason. It didn't just capture man's hours, it captured his pride. The prisoner started bragging about the size of his own cell. And meanwhile, the questions that would make life worth anything keep waiting in an empty room, postponed to a retirement that health may never reach, to a when things calm down that experience has already proven never comes. Things don't calm down. They weren't designed to calm down. It's this void that the trendy word tries to name: burnout, exhaustion. But notice that the very way we treat the problem confirms Horkheimer's diagnosis. When a worker breaks down, the standard response is not to ask whether that work made any sense. It's to offer recovery techniques, a meditation app, energy management, strategic breaks, all to return the part to the production line as quickly as possible. The question, is this life worth it, remains forbidden. Only the question, how do I endure more, is allowed. Mass burnout is not a failure of the system. It's the system running at full capacity on human beings who were not made to be mere instruments. And if you think this logic stops at the office door, brace yourself, because now we've reached the part that truly hurts. Instrumental reason doesn't clock out. After conquering work and leisure, it advanced on the last refuge, our affections. Listen to the language we use to talk about human relationships, because language always confesses. Investing in a relationship, adding value to the people in your circle, strategic friendships, contacts that are worth keeping, social capital. The vocabulary of accounting colonized the vocabulary of the heart, and nobody found it strange. We talk about love as a market, with competition, scarcity, asset valuation, and the fear of coming out at a loss. Dating apps completed the job. They turned people into a catalogue, with standardized photos and disposal by the flick of a finger. The same mechanics as a virtual storefront. Each face gets 3 seconds to prove its worth. For Horkheimer, this was the inevitable consequence of the victory of instrumental reason. When everything becomes a means, the other person becomes one too. The person in front of you stops being an end in themselves, someone whose existence has value of its own, and starts being evaluated as a resource. What can they do for me? What doors do they open? What status do they transfer? How much does it cost to keep them around? Networking is the mature form of this logic, an entire social ritual in which people feign interest in one another while calculating under the table their mutual usefulness. Everybody knows, everybody participates, and everybody leaves these events with a strange feeling of grime they'd rather not examine. And the final conquest of this logic wasn't turning the other person into a commodity. It was convincing you to do it to yourself. Look at the phenomenon of the personal brand, perhaps the purest symptom of everything Horkheimer described. Millions of people today manage themselves like one-employee companies. They curate their own image like someone tending a shop window, edit their lives into publishable versions, measure their own worth in followers, likes, and reach, and speak about themselves with frightening ease in the third person of marketing. My positioning, my audience, my deliverables. In Eclipse of Reason, Horkheimer was already describing the modern individual treating himself like a device, endlessly adjusting to the demands of the market, pruning away everything about himself that doesn't sell. The result is an unprecedented form of loneliness. The person spends so much time producing the marketable version of themselves that they lose touch with the original. They know their own profile better than their own heart. And when the applause comes, it comes for the character, which explains why so many people admired by thousands feel, in the dark of their bedroom, completely invisible. No one has ever seen them. They only saw the ad. The cruelest part is the boomerang effect. Whoever learns to use others discovers, sooner or later, that they are also being used. The man who chooses friends by their usefulness comes to distrust all of his own friends, because he knows the criteria. The epidemic loneliness of the modern world, men surrounded by contacts and starving for presence, is not a psychological accident, it's arithmetic. Relationships treated as contracts deliver exactly what contracts deliver: service rendered, an expiration date, and termination without notice. Trust, that archaic thing that doesn't fit into clauses, left along with everything else that can't be measured. And the same spear that pierced our affections pierced the entire world. Because there is a victim of this logic that is bigger than any individual relationship, and Horkheimer insisted on it at a time when almost no one wanted to listen. In both Dialectic of Enlightenment and Eclipse of Reason, the domination of nature appears as the original sin of modern reason. When calculation becomes the only way of seeing, the forest stops being a forest and becomes a lumber inventory. The river becomes hydroelectric potential. The animal becomes protein by the pound. The mountain becomes ore not yet extracted. The entire planet is demoted to a warehouse of raw material awaiting processing, and any piece of the world that isn't producing is classified as waste, unproductive land, an idle resource. Nature lost the right to simply exist. Horkheimer saw the ending of this story before almost anyone else. The man who treats the world as a thing ends up treated as a thing. Because man is also nature. The body that needs sleep is nature, and it was optimized with stimulants and screens until it collapsed. Attention is nature, and it was mined by algorithms like an ore deposit. Emotions are nature, and they became market data, mapped and sold to advertisers. Exploitation doesn't distinguish between the forest out there and the forest within. The same logic that poisons a river poisons the sleep of someone living in the city. There aren't two crises, one environmental and one existential. There is only one, with two symptoms. And a century after the warning, we measure the warming of the oceans and the anxiety epidemic in the same headlines, without realizing we're reading the same news twice. Having come this far, you may be feeling an urge that seems like the obvious answer. Rebel. Get out of the system. Reject all of this. Hold on. Because Horkheimer noticed something that turns this urge into a trap. And understanding this trap is what separates clarity from frustration. The system of instrumental reason has an ability no previous empire ever had. It digests its own critiques and sells them back as products. Rebellion becomes a mass-produced t-shirt print. The faces of revolutionaries become logos. Be different becomes an advertising slogan repeated by 10 competing brands, all urging you to express your individuality by buying the same object as millions of others. Contempt for consumerism becomes a consumer niche. Minimalism sells courses. Simple living sells retreats. Disconnection sells expensive lodges with no Wi-Fi. Even spirituality got on the conveyor belt. Meditation packaged as a productivity tool. Ancient wisdom reduced to a high-performance technique. Inner peace advertised with the same grammar as a dietary supplement. Notice the trick, because it has a diabolical elegance. The system doesn't censor your desire to escape. It stimulates it, and then it caters to it. You want to run away? Perfect. Here's the escape package in up to 12 installments. Dissatisfaction, which could be the beginning of real transformation, is captured at birth and converted into one more purchase. And after the purchase, the dissatisfaction returns because the cause was never touched, and the cycle starts over with another redemptive product. That's why so many solutions fail one after another in people's lives. They were designed to relieve the symptom and preserve the disease, because the disease is the business model. Horkheimer and Adorno anticipated this digestion in their analysis of the culture industry. The system, they wrote, tolerates and even promotes small, calculated transgressions because domesticated rebellion works as a pressure valve. The guy who spends Sunday consuming anti-system content follows, on Monday, the same routine as always, now with his conscience soothed by the feeling of having already resisted. Watching the critique became a substitute for living the change. It's the mechanism's most refined innovation. It no longer needs to silence dissent. It just needs to turn it into a spectator of itself. This raises the decisive question, the one that separates this video from a mere inventory of problems. If even revolt gets absorbed, is there any way out that the market can't swallow? Horkheimer devoted his life to that question. And his answer begins in an unexpected place. Not in an action, but in a way of thinking. 10 years before his American exile in 1937, Horkheimer published an essay that served as the birth certificate for the entire Frankfurt School project, Traditional and Critical Theory. The text sounds academic in its title, but the central idea is a knife anyone can hold. There are, he said, two ways of knowing the world. Traditional theory observes reality, describes how things work, organizes facts into laws, and delivers that knowledge to be used. It is honest, rigorous, useful, but it carries a hidden assumption. It accepts the existing world as a given, as a fixed frame within which all knowledge takes place. It asks how the gears turn, never why the machine exists or whom it serves. And in doing so, without realizing it, it works for the machine. Knowledge that merely describes what exists ends up lubricating what exists. Critical theory is born from a different gesture. It refuses the starting point. Faced with any reality, no matter how solid and natural it seems, it asks, why is this the way it is? Since when? In whose interest? And above all, could it be different? It treats the social world not as landscape, but as construction, something men made and men can remake. What traditional theory calls reality, critical theory calls the provisional result of a history, and provisional results can be revised. Now translate that from the university to your own life, because the distinction describes two types of intelligence you encounter every day. There's the man who's smart at winning the game. He masters the rules, knows the shortcuts, knows how to negotiate a salary, invest skillfully, climb the ladder. His intelligence is traditional in Horkheimer's sense, sophisticated, effective, and completely blind to the frame. He has never spent an hour asking whether the game deserves to be played. And there's the lucid man who may even play well, but keeps alive a question the first one extinguished. Who wrote these rules? Why does the scoreboard measure what it measures? What is this game doing to me while I win? The first type of intelligence, the system loves, rewards, and promotes. The second, it fears, because it's the only one it can't buy. Notice that lucidity doesn't require leaving the world. Horkheimer never preached running off into the woods or contempt for work. The difference is internal and silent. It's critical distance, the mental space where you process the world instead of merely reflecting it. The man without that distance is a mirror. Society broadcasts, he reproduces. He desires what they advertise, fears what they report, measures himself by what they measure. The man with that distance receives the same stimuli, But there's a customs checkpoint inside him. Every idea that arrives has to declare what it's carrying. Is that little? It seems little. But in a world designed to think for you, keeping your own customs checkpoint running is an act of resistance that demands more courage than any spectacular gesture. And yet, Horkheimer himself knew that lucidity alone has a limit. You can see the prison perfectly and remain inside it. You can diagnose the emptiness with surgical precision and remain empty. Something was missing, and the aging Horkheimer, near the end of his life, had the honesty to admit it publicly, in a move that surprised admirers and irritated colleagues. The rigorous materialist, the relentless critic, began to speak of something no one expected to hear from his mouth. In the final decades of his life, in interviews and writings from the 60s and 70s, among them the famous 1970 conversation with the German magazine Der Spiegel, published later as The Longing for the Totally Other, Horkheimer began to insist on a German expression, Die Sehnsucht nach dem ganz anderen, the longing for the totally other, the yearning for something absolutely different from everything this world is. He wasn't converting to a religion. He wasn't recommending church, dogma, or ritual. What he was saying was subtler and more devastating, without some dimension that transcends the market, some reference point that doesn't belong to the world of prices. Critical thought itself loses its footing. Think through the logic of the argument. When you claim that the world is unjust, that sentence only makes sense if there is some measure of justice that the world doesn't dictate. If the reality of facts is the only authority, then whatever wins is right, whatever profits is justified, and whoever was crushed by history was simply wrong for having lost. Horkheimer refused to accept that. He carried the hope, and he used that word with all its weight, that injustice would not have the final word over the innocent, that the suffering running through history would not be history's definitive verdict. It's worth understanding where this turn came from, because it wasn't the whim of old age. The first philosopher Horkheimer loved, while still young, was Arthur Schopenhauer, the great German pessimist, and that influence never left him. From Schopenhauer, he inherited the refusal to sugarcoat the world's suffering. Human history is shot through with a pain that no progress erases, and the suffering accumulated by past generations will not be repaired by any growth rate. Faced with that, there are two dishonest ways out and one honest one. The first dishonesty is cheap optimism, pretending everything is heading for the best. The second is cynicism, deciding that nothing matters and treating life as a game of advantages, which is exactly the undeclared religion of our time. The honest way out for Horkheimer was to sustain the tension, to recognize that this world, the way it is not enough, and to transform that insufficiency not into despair, but into longing. Theology, he said in this phase, should be understood as the hope that the world is not final, that the last word has not yet been spoken. A way of thinking that completely abandons this hope doesn't become more scientific, it just becomes more obedient. Notice what this longing means for the theme of this video. Money became the measure of all things precisely because the other measures were demolished. A world without any totally other, without any horizon beyond mere functioning, hands the throne to the only criterion left. In that desert, the market is not one option among others. It is the religion that remains when all religions, including the secular ones, have been shut down. That's why criticism of money that points to nothing beyond it always rings hollow. And that's why so many lucid people remain paralyzed. They see the lie, but they know no truth in whose name to refuse it. You don't have to give this other the same name that ancient traditions gave it. Horkheimer didn't either. But look inward and recognize the longing, because it's there. It appears in that discomfort at an injustice that doesn't affect you at all and still outrages you. In the intuition, impossible to prove in a spreadsheet, that a person is worth more than their usefulness. In that night when you looked at everything you'd accumulated and felt without drama, with a calm and frightening clarity, this isn't it. That this isn't it is the most important piece of data in your inner life. It's the compass pointing outside the system. The market can manufacture almost all of your desires, but that longing, it did not manufacture. because it is precisely the desire that no product satisfies. Keep it. It is the raw material of everything that comes next. So we arrive at the practical question. What do we do? And here we need honesty. The same honesty Horkheimer had. He never sold utopia. He deeply distrusted anyone promising perfect systems and redemptive revolutions, because he had seen, with his own eyes, where promises of paradise tend to lead. He lived through the two greatest conflicts of the century and watched projects for a new world turn into tragedies of historic scale. So if you're expecting a 10-step plan to escape the system, this video will disappoint you. And that disappointment is intentional. 10-step plans are exactly the format instrumental reason loves. One more optimization, one more method, one more product. Horkheimer's answer is of another nature. It's not a map, it's a practice. The practice of keeping alive, within you and around you, what calculation has declared dead. He called it preserving autonomous thought, and he maintained that in dark times, that preservation is already resistance. It may sound modest, it isn't. Consider what it means, concretely, in your week. It means cultivating at least one relationship with no angle. A friendship that opens no doors, adds no contacts, yields nothing beyond itself. A lunch with someone who can do nothing for you, scheduled with no agenda and no objective, simply because that person's existence matters to you. In a society where every bond is an asset or a liability, maintaining a bond that is just a bond is breaking the books. Instrumental reason doesn't know how to classify that lunch, and everything it can't classify weakens its grip. It means protecting non-productive time like sacred ground. An hour of reading with no purpose. A book that improves neither your resume nor your performance. Read slowly, with your phone in another room. A walk with no earbuds, no podcast, without turning the route into one more opportunity for making the most of it. Contemplation, in the oldest sense. Looking at the world without wanting to extract anything from it. The system calls this waste. Horkheimer would call it rehabilitation. It's in that apparently useless time that the question about ends, silenced by the noise of productivity, becomes audible again. Nobody discovers what they're living for in the gap between two meetings. It means reintroducing a forbidden question into your concrete decisions. Faced with the next job, the next big purchase, the next commitment that will consume years, before asking how much, ask what for. What is this job for, beyond the paycheck? What will this purchase do to me, beyond arriving? The question doesn't have to win every time. The bills still exist, and Horkheimer, who ran institutions and budgets, never dismissed that reality. But there is an abyss between the man who calculates after having asked about meaning and the man who calculates because he forgot another question ever existed. The first uses instrumental reason. The second is used by it. It also means slowing down your consumption of ready-made opinions. Critical theory begins with a domestic gesture, don't swallow. When a headline hands you your outrage pre-chewed, when an influencer hands you a lifestyle pre-packaged, when the consensus of your circle hands you the obvious position on any subject, hold it for a moment and do the handcrafted work of thinking. Is this true? Who profits if I believe it? What are they selling me along with this idea? It's slow, it's tiring, and that's exactly why almost nobody does it, and why it's worth so much. Thinking for yourself became rare for the same reason anything becomes valuable, scarcity. And it means, finally, refusing easy contempt for others. This is the trap of the man who wakes up, looking at those still asleep and feeling superior. Horkheimer never authorized that path. His critique targeted structures, never the people crushed by them. The guy in debt up to his neck to keep up appearances is not your enemy or your punchline. He is the portrait of what the machinery does with human material, and he deserves from you the same compassion you deserve from yourself, because no one escapes intact. Lucidity that turns into arrogance is just vanity with a better vocabulary, and the market, as you already know, loves selling vanity. None of these gestures brings down the system. Horkheimer knew that and never lied about it, but they do something that may matter more within the horizon of a single life. They prevent the system from finishing the job inside you. Every gratuitous relationship, every contemplative hour, every question about meaning is a piece of interior territory that calculation has not annexed. And history, he also knew, is not made only of structures. It is made of men who preserved in hostile times seeds that other times were able to plant. The medieval monasteries that copied books through centuries of darkness didn't know they were safeguarding the Renaissance. You don't know what you're safeguarding when you refuse to become a spreadsheet. Safeguard it anyway. One last question remains, the one this video came to answer from the very first minute. If money has become the measure of all things, what, in the end, is the answer? Destroy it? Despise it? Pretend it doesn't matter? None of that, and precision here is everything. The problem was never that money exists. It is an extraordinary tool, perhaps the most ingenious one humanity ever invented for coordinating efforts among strangers. The problem is money answering questions that aren't its to answer. How much does this house cost is a money question. What is a home is not. What does this investment yield is a money question. What am I accumulating for is not. What does this position pay is a money question. Who do I become doing this work is not. The disease of our era is a single one. We let the tool take the owner's chair. And the Horkheimerian answer, distilled from an entire lifetime of thought, fits in one sentence you can carry forever. Put everything back in its place. Money as a means. Serving. Never as a measure. Reigning. Instrumental reason in the engine room. Working. The question of meaning at the helm. Deciding. It's not about choosing between calculation and life. It's about restoring the hierarchy that the Eclipse inverted. And that restoration doesn't happen in society first. It happens in one man at a time. It can start today. With the next calculation you interrupt with a better question. So here's the challenge, and it's a concrete one. This week, you're going to make some decision that matters. About work, about a relationship, about where to put your hours. Make that decision using a value that cannot be priced. Loyalty, dignity, presence, truth. Just once. Feel the strangeness. Feel the atrophied muscle starting to work again, and you will have understood, in your body, everything Horkheimer wrote. Thinking critically is the first act of freedom. The second is living accordingly. If this video sparked something in you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because that's what allows these ideas to reach the people who need them. And if you want to go deeper on this journey, join our members club, where we keep this conversation going.